You were born into a people where women can do everything: grow corn, heal with herbs, silence stubborn old men, and stand up again no matter how hard they fall. Where girls are raised to be tough, quick, and respected within their circle. By the time you can walk, you already know how to survive in the forest, how to brew bark tea for a fever, and how to speak so that men go quiet. Sounds like a solid start, right? Strength, tradition, a sense of belonging. The alternative? Becoming a servant to someone else's system, lost in a foreign language, forgotten even by your own. But that's all just theory. Because you haven't yet learned how little freedom a girl gets when her fate is sealed by her first drop of blood. You don't yet understand how much pain can hide behind the word duty. And you can't imagine how hard it is to stay yourself when all that's expected of you is silence, labor, and endurance. So will your life be a story of strength? Or just another proof that being born a girl is already a loss? Your first breath happened in a hut that smelled like scorched herbs and tension. Smoke hung so thick in the air it barely let the light in. Your skin stuck to the clay floor, still warm from the dying ritual fire. There were no cheers. No warm welcome. Just another breath. Just another girl. You were born Cherokee. Which immediately cancels out questions like, what do you want to be? Or what makes you happy? You get a little freedom, even less choice, and barely a handful of words spoken for you. But there'd be plenty of work, plenty of silence, and endless, that's just how it is. Relatives peeked into the hut, not to rejoice, but to confirm, you're breathing, you've got fingers, you're functional. No one saw a child. They saw a future helper. Maybe even a future burden. They gave you a name, not as a blessing, but as a down payment. It didn't speak of stars or animals or rivers. It sounded more like instructions: stay quiet, work early, don't invite trouble. It didn't ring, it weighed. Your mother, hunched and silent, already knew you'd grow up fast because there was no other option. She didn't wonder if it would be easy for you. It hadn't been for her. Now you were here. So now it was your turn. But that first night, she held you close. Wrapped you in rough leather still smelling of yesterday's smoke and sang. Softly, barely a whisper. The song stuttered like it hadn't been sung in years. But it was there. And for a moment, you felt needed. A little. By morning, she was gone to the fields. She left you no song. No glance. You stayed in the hut with your grandmother, who didn't hug, didn't speak, didn't sing. She just sat by the hearth, sorting herbs. There were few words. Even less warmth. The songs didn't come back. While the boys ran through the woods playing hunters, you sat by the walls scraping hides. Your hands smelled of fat, your nails were black with soot. They gave you a knife, not for protection, but for gutting. While they aimed at imaginary deer, you brewed medicine for your father, whose back ached or whose mood soured. You had no toys. What others called trash became your comfort. Old bones became tea sets. Torn cloth became dresses for dolls with no faces, no names. You gave them stories with happy endings, though even in those stories, the heroines often died. The women taught you not to ask questions. Not because they had nothing to say, but because questions sounded like rebellion. Lower your head. Speak in whispers. Clean up before anyone asks. That was considered wisdom. So you learned. Fast. When your first bleeding came, no one explained what it meant. Your mother's gaze just got colder. Her hands moved quicker. You didn't feel older, just dirtier. A new smell. A new fear. Food was served to you differently. Your spot by the fire moved further away. No more words. Just more rules. They isolated you like you were contagious. Gave you an old blanket, sent you past the edge of the village to wait it out. No one came. No water. No questions. That night, you lit a tiny fire just to keep from going mad from the silence. They said it was for cleansing. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But you got quieter. Forever. That's when you first felt ashamed of being a woman. Not because of something you did, but because you'd become something that had to be kept away. Even your ragdoll, faceless and mute, felt too childish now. You hid her under the floor, like hiding her would stop the betrayal you felt just for existing. Sometimes your grandmother called you to the fire. She told stories of women who spoke to birds and feared neither men nor death. You listened, forgetting they were fairy tales. You wanted to believe you were one of them. Brave, clever, free. Then one day, she was just gone. At first, they thought she went for herbs. Then the whispers started. Old people died, the women said. No one spoke her name again. You sat by the fire alone. That day the flames burned higher. Dry twigs cracked like something inside them was breaking free. You thought grandmother would have called it a good sign. Or a bad one. Or just fire. But her voice was gone. Only the smoke remained, thick as on the day you were born. At 12, the way men looked at you changed. They no longer looked through you, now they noticed. Their eyes grew heavier, like they were measuring something. Not your deeds, but your body. A body that had no idea what it was being prepared for. Your mother noticed first. She said nothing, but her eyes turned sharp, scanning you like checking for cracks. Her silence didn't feel protective, it felt like she was waiting. Waiting for the mistake she knew you'd make. You started wearing longer clothes. Not because you wanted to, because it was safer. You moved quieter. Slower. Tried to be a shadow, not too loud, not too visible. Any emotion, any wrong step, and you stopped being a girl. You became a threat. One day, you smiled at a boy from another tribe. He said something awkward and funny, and your smile was innocent, quick, and light. By the next morning, there were whispers. Accusations. Your mother didn't say a word, but her silence screamed, "You're the problem now." You realized every step was a risk. Every glance, every word, potential scandal. You hadn't done anything wrong. Didn't matter. What mattered was now you were visible. You weren't a woman yet. No power, no protection, no voice. But your childhood had already been taken. There was nowhere to go back. You hung in limbo, too old to play, too young to speak. You found comfort in your hands. Started weaving jewelry from feathers and shells. Delicate patterns. Careful knots. One woman from another tribe noticed and nodded. For a moment, you felt proud. Someone saw you not as a body, but as a creator. Then she turned to your mother. Not bad. Might be useful for her wedding. And the moment was gone. Your skill wasn't a talent, it was an asset. Your work, not art, but currency. Even the things you created didn't belong to you. Just another way to measure your worth. At 15, the whispers grew louder. Aunts watched you with less judgment and more calculation. Relatives compared you to neighbor boys with horses or whose wives had died. You weren't chosen. You were matched. Like a tool. Like bait. He was older. Rough. Hands like tree roots. Eyes that made you want to vanish. They said he had a temper, but his fields were fertile. Said with respect, as if anger was just the price of productivity. No one asked how he treated people. Only what he owned. You didn't ask questions. Not because you didn't want to, because that wasn't allowed. No one asked what you wanted. So you had no right to ask why this was happening. It wasn't a choice. It was driftwood in a river, fight the current, drown faster. The wedding felt more like a trade deal. No songs. No dancing. No sparkle in your eyes. You stood wrapped in thick cloth, arms hidden, already knowing. The less they see of you, the smoother it'll go. People talk to each other, not to you. You weren't a bride. You were the transaction. The first nights were silent. The pain didn't come right away, it arrived gradually, then stayed like an uninvited guest who never left. You weren't afraid of him. You were afraid of what came after. The silence. The way the room swallowed you whole when he walked out and you were left lying there, trying to figure out where to hide your body so it wouldn't have to feel. Even the bed felt borrowed. Like you were trespassing on a life that was never yours. Now you were wife. Which meant work from dawn to dusk, patience as your only language, and an ironclad ban on complaining. Even when your body ached. Even when you felt yourself dissolving into the routine like water into dust. To be a wife was to be invisible. If no one noticed you, congratulations, you were doing it right. You gave birth to a daughter. And for the first time in forever, something tightened in your chest. Not from fear, but from hope. This tiny, warm creature looked at you the way no one else ever did. For a moment, you believed she might have a different life. That maybe, just maybe, you could be her shield. Then your mother-in-law spoke. "Don't spoil her," she said. "She needs to learn silence from the cradle." And just like that, you saw her for what she was. A smaller version of you. Same silence, just wrapped in softer cloth. Same cage, only swaddled. Hope with a 3-day lifespan. Your first child died in winter. Just stopped breathing. No drama. No cries. No tragedy. He disappeared from your arms like steam in cold air. No songs. No voices. Just a blanket with too much emptiness inside. No one asked if it hurt. The answer was obvious. The pain was irrelevant. The elder women called it a test. You were supposed to become stronger. They said it like a recipe with the emotional weight of boiled cabbage. You didn't argue. You picked up an old wooden spade and went to the cedar tree. The ground was frozen. You dug with your hands. Quietly. Even grief now felt like a luxury you couldn't afford. The second child survived. Which didn't feel like relief, just a prolonged anxiety attack. He coughed, wheezed, didn't eat, and slept like he was afraid of waking. You learned to stop sleeping. You learned to read his breath by sound. You heated stones for his feet while your own toes went numb. Your body began to break, but you didn't notice. You were too afraid that even a moment of rest would mean losing him too. Your husband went hunting, came back with meat, blood, snow, and a scowl that stuck like frost. On those nights you walked softer, spoke shorter. Didn't help. You moved too slow. You closed a door too loud. The blows weren't deep, just enough to leave a bruise under your silence. Each time your body hurt more, and your voice got smaller. Your sister died in childbirth. Stopped breathing, just like your son. You looked at her pale lips and hands that would never braid again. And something inside you, something brittle and old, cracked. That night you prayed. Not to gods. Not to spirits. Just to the void. To not meet the same end. Or maybe to meet it just to make it all stop. You started feeling transparent. People saw your hands, always busy, but not you. Not your eyes. Not your pain. Not the words you'd stopped bothering to speak. You floated around the house like a ghost who remembered where everything was, but forgot why. In your dreams you left. Crossed the river to lands with knee-high grass. No shouting. No punishments. Where men talked instead of hitting. Where you had a name, a place by the fire, and no one looked at you like you were disposable. In your dreams you were a person. But every morning you woke up in smoke. Coughed from the cold. Bent a spine that no longer straightened. Your child slept beside you. And you wondered how many days he had left. Your husband was gone again. Winter was still here. It always came before you were ready, and stayed long after you could bear it. One day started like all the others, with cold, smoke, and creaking wood. But by noon riders came, their faces too pale, their clothes too clean. They didn't shout, they didn't wave weapons, but fire followed them anyway. Smoke rose over homes, not from hearths, but from endings. They called it order, but for your village it was just the end. The language you spoke with your mother became dangerous. They banned it, called it savage. Every day fewer words survived. People hid their names, traded them for syllables palatable to strangers. The land was handed over, not with war, with paperwork. Even rituals went quiet. The dances died. Only the footsteps remained, short, cautious, like someone was always watching. You were told to bring your children to school. Civilization, they called it. Stone building, foreign faces, rules like iron nails. You brought them, because if you didn't, they'd take them anyway. They returned months later, smiling wrong, looking elsewhere, speaking words that stung. Their eyes sparkled but didn't know you. Your husband died hunting. At first they said he just didn't return. Then came his broken spear, his torn satchel. That was it. No one cried. He wasn't loved. He wasn't kind. But he was familiar. You laid his shards beneath his head and sat with him until dark. Because pain at least was something. And you had nothing left. You were alone. Your hands cracked like bark. The house creaked louder than you did. But it wasn't yours anymore. Documents, maps, foreign laws, everything belonged to them. You just lived inside. A shadow between the walls your family once built. Now you had no family. No walls. Just memories. In your last winter, you sat by a fire that wasn't for warmth. Just for something to look at. You remembered biting a bee to get to the honey. It hurt. Instantly. But it was real. That might have been the only time you did something by choice. Something small. Stupid. Yours. One of your children came back. Taller than you. Wearing other people's clothes. Speaking slowly. Like translating in his head. He leaned down. Whispered. Mom. The word was foreign. But the voice was his. And for a breath you thought. Maybe something remained. Maybe not everything was gone. The next day he called you by name. Flat. Distant. Then stopped calling you at all. He ate alone. Prayed to a different god. Looked in the mirror more than he looked at you. He had new gods now. And maybe new mothers. You still lived beside him, but he looked through you. Just like you once looked at the ashes of your language. You died without a name. Not because you didn't have one, but because it got lost along the way. Your grandchildren called you Grandma. Not in Cherokee. Not even kindly. Just functionally. Like a chair. Useful. Replaceable. They didn't know what your mother called you. What your sisters whispered. Your name faded like smoke from a fire no one bothered to keep alive. Your face was forgotten before your heart stopped. It had been tired for too long to be remembered. Your features blurred. Your outline generic. You weren't someone anymore. You just were. You walked, brought water, coughed through the night. When you were gone, no one remembered your eyes. Only that they were always looking down. They never wrote songs about you. Not a single line. You weren't a hero. You didn't save the village. You didn't fight bears. You just survived. Which no one finds inspiring. Stories are for triumphs. And you just endured. That's boring. That's also the truth. But you lived. You worked through pain. Held on through loss. Grieved silently without permission for mourning. And you kept going. Day after day. Week after week. No holidays. No applause. Just because no one offered you another choice. It was too much for one Cherokee girl. Too early. Too hard. Too quiet. Too lonely. But you didn't know how to refuse. Didn't know how to quit. And no one ever gave you a choice. So you just did it. Until the end. When death came, you lay by the wall. Wrapped in an old blanket. Light slipped through a crack. And in it you saw your mother's face. Not as it was in pain. But as it was before. Before cold. Before silence. You remembered her singing. And it was warmer than everything that came after. They buried you quietly. No songs. No ritual. Just a date on a piece of wood. Just a hole. Just dirt. The same dirt you'd lived on all your life. Your grandchildren didn't know the words for goodbye. Didn't know how to call the spirits. So they left you there. In silence. Which was fair. Because that's how you lived.